Hi, baddies. I am your host, Tara Newell, and today's guest, I have my dear friend, Vanessa Reiser. She is a licensed therapist. She specializes in narcissist and cult abuse. So I'm so excited to have her today. We're going to talk about the P. Diddy situation, about the Cassie Ventura video going around. And since this has come out, she has actually put out a statement, and I would like to read her statement today. I'm going to read it from my phone so that I don't mess up anything. So it says, "Thank you for all the love and support from my family, friends, strangers, and those I have yet to meet. The outpouring of love has created a place for my younger self to settle and feel safe now. But this is the only beginning. Domestic violence is the issue. It broke me down to someone I never thought I would become. With a lot of hard work, I am better today, but I will always be recovering from my past. Thank you to everyone that has taken the time to take this matter seriously. My only ask is that everyone open their heart to believing victims the first time. It takes a lot of heart to tell the truth out of a situation that you were powerless in. I offer my hand to those that are still living in fear. Reach out to your people. Don't cut them off. No one should carry this weight alone. This healing journey is never ending, but this support means everything to me. Thank you. Love always, Cassie." So that has been her response. We support Cassie in this. And let's now chat about what happened next. Oh, and also to clarify one thing, I mentioned in this video that I thought that P. Diddy had a show where he discovered the Pussycat Dolls. It was actually Danity Kane that he discovered. So let's get into it. Hi, I'm Tara Newell. A trigger warning to today's. Hi, Vanessa. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have you because we've been friends for how long now? Like 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, approximately.
Approximately. And you have such an incredible story of what you do to raise awareness on narcissistic abuse with a wedding dress, running New York State in a wedding dress for how many miles?
285.
Yes, that is just insane to me, but I'm happy that you did it to spread awareness, and I support you from far away.
Thank you. That's okay.
Yeah, so why don't you tell the people that don't know you a little bit more about you and what you do?
Sure. So I am a psychotherapist, licensed in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Florida. I specialize in narcissistic abuse and cult abuse. And most people know me from my run across New York State in a wedding dress. It was 285 miles in 11 days. And then we subsequently traversed New Jersey, Connecticut, and we'll be doing Massachusetts June 5th and 6th, I believe, of next month, sorry. So 2024, we're going to do Massachusetts. And yeah, so I love the work that I do. And I basically have most of my clients are dealing with a lot of psychological abuse and domestic violence.
Okay, and I know that you were also a victim at domestic violence, right?
Yeah, so I have definitely had my share of toxic people in my life, more than one occasion, and kind of developed an understanding of some of the behaviors that are rather manipulative. We see this also with cult leaders, in terms of mind control and gaslighting and some of the tactics that they use. They tend to have a playbook. And once you kind of understand it, you really see it as like a copy and paste. They all sort of do the same thing. And some of them are particularly dangerous, especially if they are sociopathic. So those persons can be really dangerous. And especially in the family court systems, this is like a big problem for many of my clients. I know with your story, Tara, there were some major physical issues and some major threats to your life. And while a lot of my clients do experience physical violence, but most of my clients will express to me that they would rather have like an acute kind of physical altercation versus the prolonged, insidious psychological damage that comes from manipulation over many years. And so it's kind of like this silent killer. People really do end up suicidal. Maybe they lose their kids in court to somebody who's particularly charming and maybe has a lot of funds and resources. So I'm dealing with this every day, trying to help people to manage this trauma.
Yeah. And I know we have a mutual friend, One Mom's Battle, Tina Swithin, because I've seen you repost her stuff and just talking about the court system. She's a great resource if you're fighting with a psychopath in court because it's a hard dance.
Yeah, she's doing the Lord's work. I put her in my book actually because she really goes up against judges, bad therapists, attorneys. She's not afraid to post their picture on her wall, which is kind of unheard of because these are people that are very well connected and protected and powerful. And she sort of goes up against those powers. And so the amount of bravery that I see on her page and with her clients is just unbelievable. She's really brave in her work. So she's not afraid to, kind of name the players in terms of bad judges, attorneys, and therapists, law guardians, and stuff like that. So she's extremely courageous because these are people that are really powerful, connected, wealthy. And so she needs to be supported in every way possible because recently one of the, I think he was the guitarist for Stone Temple Pilots or something, had started to come after her directly just for having shared a victim story. So that's what happens when narcissists feel they're getting exposed, is they will come after not just the victim, but anyone who supports the victim. I've had plenty of people come after me in my practice just because their ex is my client. And so, they sort of try to find ways to shut everyone up. They're very, very afraid of being exposed. So they will go to very extreme lengths to quiet any, narrative that doesn't suit them. And so Tina is phenomenal in her bravery. I can't say enough about her. I just think that she is like the Mother Teresa of our time.
100%. And I tell everyone, I'm like, okay, you're dealing with the court family system. Tina is your girl.
Yep. Tina is amazing. And what she does is ethically, she will receive 3 or more complaints on one person. And then and only then will she post about them. So she's legitimate in terms of, she's not going to just post because you say so. She's going to make sure that this person has, like a pattern.
Okay. So going back to Tina Swithin and people that will complain about someone speaking up. How do you deal with that when the narcissist is like, hey, this person is making stuff up or this person's not saying correct information about me? How do you deal with that?
It's really hard because it's hard to get evidence against a narcissist. They tend to be really sneaky and slippery. They will portray themselves in public as being rather philanthropic, and these are sort of poets, priests, and politicians that are kissing babies and doing all of the stuff that looks really like, oh, this person's like the perfect soccer dad, or this is the pageant mom. How could she ever be abusive behind the scenes? But those are actually really glaring red flags. If somebody seems like they're over the top charming, and you see them on social media as this perfect family, and everyone's in these photographs and everyone's wearing that white t-shirt or jeans on the beach or something. It's like, if it looks particularly stagey, this could be an indicator. So I think it's hard to kind of present this to a judicial system that doesn't care and doesn't get it, or both. Like, they don't they don't really understand what narcissistic abuse is because it's very hard to describe. And it's hard to process even for the victim. So how are they going to describe it? They're still trying to figure out, like, how could this have happened? And then a lot of people in the judicial system are narcissists. I mean, they're just sort of loving the, pageantry of the courtroom. So we see this a lot with judges and attorneys. And I think the data is that 1 out of 4 CEOs is a psychopath directly. So they know how to climb the ladder and they know how to get in those positions of power real easily. So a lot of them just don't give a shit. So I often counsel people on ways to try to get out of the family court system. If you can kind of get into a civil dispute where you get in front of a jury, this would be ideal. Obviously in divorce, it's really hard to avoid. And then you have to just get receipts and try to chronicle everything. But it's hard. I have clients that, lose their children, that end up getting sentenced at the hands of an abuser because they're really manipulative and they know how to shift the narrative to favor them. And it works. And the reason why it works is because they've been doing it for so long, and they have figured out that what they're doing does actually work. It is believable. People don't understand this. We see this with a lot of different people in media, different people that have gotten a better narrative. And we don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but I can kind of tell based on a lot of some of the things I see in pop culture. P. Diddy, I know this whole thing has come out where people are seeing now, what he has, but many have known about this for, decades, that he's been a problem, and people are afraid of his power. People are afraid of his money. And this is no different in different environments where somebody, sort of intimidates others into staying quiet around the truth. So it's pretty pervasive. It's very triggering for so many of my followers and clients to see the injustice of it. This is the part that people really, really, really struggle with this.
Yeah. And what were your thoughts about the video being blown up and just on everyone's social media? I feel like every post I clicked on, it was that post. And then it, at least for me, put me into a state where I'm like, okay, I have to go into a trauma hole for a minute, because at least for me, and I know for so many other survivors who have been in situations like that, like I was holding my head when her hair was being pulled, because when you get your hair pulled, it's like the natural response is to hold your head usually.
Right. I think I was struggling with the fact that people needed to see this to believe her. But it was like dichotomous, because then a part of me was like, see, I
Yeah.
told you. Like, so it was weird. And I think there could have been ways to handle it more graciously in terms of like a warning, and sort of managing it more carefully for the people who have dealt with that, for sure. Because I did hear a lot of people feeling really, really triggered by that. I think the idea that she wasn't altogether believed was the hardest part for people, because they just don't feel believed. In fact, like even after the video came out, I'm sure there are people that are still making excuses for him.
Oh,
Like,
there was. And
so,
it's crazy. Like someone was saying like, "Oh, he apologized and everything's okay now." No.
and then, there's one other victim that's come out since, and I'm sure there are a myriad of other people that have been victimized by him. Who knows what they're going to uncover, because he's been getting away with it for so long and he seems to be untouchable. So that is the part I think that, and Dr. Ramani and I talk about the injustice piece, and she's given me some really great readings to understand what justice could look like. But there's some frustration, I think, collectively with the Me Too movement and victims of narcissistic abuse around the justice piece. It just is not there. We do see it with cult leaders for some reason, and I think it's because they are outnumbering the cult leaders. So the cult members in the fellowship, whether there's a cult of 5 or 500, will sort of maybe go up against the cult leader and have a victory, and the cult leader could see jail time. The FBI, we saw this with the Nexium cult, we saw this with Stolen Youth, and Larry from the Nexium cult. But generally, if it's a one-on-one scenario, they have this sort of like, it's two sides to every story bullshit narrative, and that's
Yeah.
really the problem here. So like, the cult leader does find himself in trouble because he's outnumbered or she's outnumbered. But in a one-on-one intimate partner scenario, this is not the case. And that's really frustrating. I think what we need to start doing potentially is have people lock arms with former victims and see if they can get involved in some of these coercive control laws to sort of do maybe class action lawsuits and start to get the momentum going around, locking arms with other victims, because that's the only way I see justice, is if it's treated as a cult.
Okay. I think when someone has multiple victims and those victims come forward, it's easier to get a conviction. But when those people have multiple victims too, a lot of the times they don't come forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when they come forward, like Bill Cosby ended up, having how many victims, and again, power and privilege, and that sort of, didn't work out. But that's the other part of it, which is a big undertaking, would be to sort of revamp the judicial system. And that's just, we're not trending in that direction even at all right now in terms of who's in the Supreme Court and stuff and caring about victims and women. So that's, kind of in the opposite direction, unfortunately. Hopefully we can turn that ship around, but we don't see a lot of people working across the aisle to support women at all.
Yeah. What is it like to actually support a survivor going through this? Say, in Cassie's circumstance, I know every individual is different, but what are some key points you would recommend that people do to support them?
I think when somebody's telling you their story of narcissistic abuse, or trying to deal with a cult leader, it's just to listen. We don't really have all of the answers, and they are dealing with trauma. They're dealing with a brain injury. And so sometimes they come off as like very dysregulated. And so to just hold space and let them know that you're there, that you're not going to leave them, that you believe them, I think is really important. I spend a lot of my time just holding space, because what people tend to do when they have a trauma or a brain injury because of psychological abuse is they tend to ruminate, because they're trying to process, like, what even is this? What is happening? And to do so, in order to process it, they spend a great deal of time expressing it.
Yeah.
Um, a great way to express it might be journaling. I oftentimes tell my clients to do like voice memo journals. So you're just sort of even raging around it, just getting it off your chest. And once you start to process it, it's like 80% of the work is really almost like creating these new neural pathways for you to sort of manage what even happened to you. And then you can kind of begin to heal and feel validated in that process. I have this really interesting perspective, because I actually get validation from my clients, because they're telling me the same thing that I experience over and over and over again, but they don't have that because they're not a therapist. So they have to do this sometimes in a solitary fashion. And that, healing process for me sort of was like made faster, because I was getting the stories and I was like, oh my God, this is, what I went through. So I like to reflect back that validation. So not that I necessarily share my story, but I will always share with them pieces of my story or others that validate them, so they don't feel alone, because they think they're crazy. They feel crazy. Sometimes I feel crazy. But you're not crazy. This is crazy. This experience is crazy making, and the people who are doing it are crazy. They're delusional, they're toxic, they're dangerous. A lot of them are psychotic. And so it's important for them to feel validated, I would say. Like, that's the paramount thing, is to validate and let them know they're not crazy.
Yeah. No, I felt like I have definitely gone through some transitions, and whether it's dealing with narcissist abuse or not, just my trauma as a whole, I felt like I was losing my mind maybe the past couple months at times, and you have been a great solace for me with that. So
Oh,
thank you. Of
well, I'm so glad. Yeah.
course.
I
Well,
know what you've gone through. I mean, we haven't gone too much into, I mean, I know the story of, but um I think when you have that kind of trauma, I see you being so gracious with yourself and being careful. And I think that's important, is that radical self-love. So good on you for doing that and listening to that voice to sort of take those moments and cater to that.
well, thank you. It's been a rough go of it lately,
Mhm.
but there's solace in finding people that relate to you in certain aspects and get trauma, because so many people don't understand trauma, and especially something that I went through is like a combative trauma. And so for me, it's going to be easier for me to get to fight more, and people don't realize that, okay, because my body actually had to go to it, sometimes I might be more reactive than not. And it's a work in progress, and it's not. So with my trauma, I went from being like reactive to like wanting to fight back, to going to flee, to going to like processing things more. But there's still times where, if you're heightened and you're triggered, that your trauma is going to come out more. But how do you differentiate the difference between PTSD and, like, say, narcissism?
PTSD can sometimes sort of manifest in characteristics that are similar. So it's a great question. Most people think that narcissistic personality disorder develops as a result of trauma. I'm not convinced. Uh, I'm not sure about all of the data. However, I have some theories around the genetic component being a variable that is understudied. So PTSD, people who fight or flight, um, to me are altogether different than somebody who is a deviant, somebody who's manipulative. Not that we don't all have narcissistic traits or abilities in terms of, like, if you're PMSing or you need a Snickers bar or whatever, and you're sort of, the little horns come out and you're just being the worst version of yourself. To me, that is different. Being a jerk or being an asshole or just being shitty or being in a bad mood, it's very different than having this pervasive pathological disorder where it is really innate within you to create damage, chaos, or look to exploit others for attention or supply. So I see them as very different. And I personally feel that there is a very strong genetic component at play.
Okay. And also something I noticed with narcissists, maybe not like psychopaths and sociopaths, I think those might be more trauma based in my opinion,
Mhm.
is that I see a lot of times the narcissist is literally like the golden child in a sense, or the child that's like, oh my gosh, this kid could do no wrong. Oh my gosh, do you want this? You want the new PS2, or I don't know the game systems anymore, but you want the new game, you want Nikes, oh, you want the Gucci cologne, and then they're giving the person everything that they want, that it's creating that like kind of entitlism in them.
Mhm.
That's what I notice is, at least like growing up in high school, I feel like it's always like the athlete, the football, the star quarterback, that's the narcissist.
Yeah. And more than likely, it's going to end up being a recipe of both, right? So there's this genetic component. It's almost like a iced tea mix, and you just add water. So it's probably the genetic component sort of dormantly there. And then you kind of add in the abuse and the sort of favoring of this child, and that creates the perfect storm. The only thing that I kind of struggle with is I ran a daycare for 9 years, and in the daycare, it was rather Freudian. Like, some kids were just organically kind and some were just not. And Freud sort of talked about the id and the ego, and how, we have to kind of develop them over time through being civilized. And I don't know that some of those children ever really sort of tame their id. I think they're almost like these giant petulant children. So there's a part of me that feels strongly about this Freudian perspective around, them never really becoming civilized, or them figuring out early on how to manipulate things. And there's not a lot of data around it or studies most of the time, because narcissists aren't coming out and being like, I'm a narcissist. Like, can you
Yeah.
study my ass? They're not really doing that. So we are left to sort of try to figure out what goes on. But yeah, probably there's a good amount of all of it at play to really like give you sort of that NPD, the pathological. But we see like there are also, psychopaths who are pretty well behaved, and then you come to learn that they are like the Ted Bundys, where you don't realize. But again, in therapy, in the clinical sense, when you have something called oppositional defiant disorder as a child, this is sort of the prerequisite for sociopathy. So these are the kids that are just organically hurting animals. They're organically starting fires. So I don't know that it's just something that comes from trauma. I feel there is a genetic component that's really, really rather strong.
Yeah, no, I noticed that even with members that have had the psychopath gene in them, I've noticed it come out more in their grandchildren. And, kids being diagnosed with a lack of empathy. And I'm like, okay, so I see it definitely with the brain and I had an experience with a kid that was like 7 years old. And during this time, he was actually trying to get my dog to go out into the street to go get hit by a car. And his mom kept telling him, don't do that. Don't do that. The dog can get hit by a car. But then there was something in the kid's mind that he was like, I want to keep doing this because I want to see the dog get hit and
Hmm.
hurt.
Yeah. So you see what I mean? There's this like, I saw it in the daycare. There were kids that were like, would bite or would be really, really, really aggressive and would do these drawings with knives. And then there were kids that were just completely altogether different. And so I don't know, it sort of begs the question, like, what is the onset? And really, is there necessarily abuse involved? Because there are plenty of people that are wickedly abused and would never harm another soul.
Yeah.
And they often find themselves in my office. So I understand trauma a great deal. And, I don't know. I struggle with that being the only situation. I think there's a very, very large genetic component.
I think so as well. But I feel like there needs to be more research, right?
Totally. I mean, that would be. I oftentimes talk about hiring just like a gaggle of interns just from like NYU and just have them sit in a think tank and study people and do all kinds of fun stuff, but I don't have the time. But I wish I did. I have all kinds of ideas I think would be great, but who has the time?
Right. And a really great book that I think is for understanding the brain too and why people behave the way they do is Behave. Have you read that book?
No.
Oh, it's amazing. It just like goes through the different aspects because this guy Robert I can never say his last name right, but it's like Sapolsky or something like that. But he is a brain doctor, I believe, and he goes to court and analyzes people who convicted murder and basically gives his description on their brain and why he thinks they are the way they are.
Yeah, I think that's the future of the world, is to get involved in brain scans for empathy. That would be such an important thing to have for world leaders, because these are people in positions of power like Hitler that can, get involved in genocide. And so we need to really take empathy as like the ground zero for NPD and sociopathy very seriously, because without empathy, we just cease to exist, period. Like
Yeah.
we don't exist as a species. Because when I had my son, I mean, I was like, I gotta feed this baby. I had no idea why. Innately, I was like, this is a thing now. Like, I have to take care of this creature, because I was so, like, it was just an innate experience, as, most mammals do. Otherwise, the child ceases to exist. So this is empathy, and without it, we don't exist. And we will surely, out ourselves. We'll just destroy ourselves if we don't get involved in having really sort of global conversations about empathy.
Yeah, true. Do you think that women develop more empathy than, say, men due to our innate sense of nurturing?
I'm not sure that they have it in terms of genetically more. I do think that systemically patriarchy and some of the misogynistic views that a lot of our cultures adopt doesn't help to cultivate empathy in men. Like we don't do enough to sort of allow them to experience that. There's a lot of reasons why I think systemically there's a major difference in those things. But also, mothers being the birthers and stuff. So probably there's something there. But I think like there are a ton of empathetic men. I don't know that we sort of cultivate that enough.
Okay, yeah, no, I think society definitely promotes like that toxic masculinity, and that definitely can be a contribute to our these egos.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a little bit about this in my book in terms of systemically, like what it's been like historically in terms of even in religious organizations and sort of the ownership of the bride getting married and like all of the things that we've learned through the media about our roles, our gender roles, and why a good amount of that is absolute garbage. But this is, these are civilized conversations. And again, I don't know that we're trending in that direction to be having them at the moment. Hopefully we'll turn that around and we can start to talk about the needs of, all of society's members. But women right now are really kind of fighting for their basic rights. So this is a weird time to be alive for women.
Oh, 100%. And something that you said about the trending factor, going back to the Sean Combs, or not Sean Combs. Is it Sean Combs, his name?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. And he had a show earlier on where he had all these people do music, and then he was like telling them, like he started all those groups like the Pussycat Dolls and stuff, right? Am I
Did
thinking of
he?
that?
I don't know that. I'm sure he did, but I
Well,
don't know.
okay. Even in that show, how he treated everyone was not really okay.
Yeah.
There was certain just him snapping, and I feel like narcissists snap a lot.
Hmm. Yeah, they really like to get a rise out of you. They tend to kind of get off on startling people, intimidating people, because it feels powerful and controlling for them to kind of glean from you your energy, whether it's good or bad. So they're looking for this coveted supply of your attention. So whatever it takes to get that, they're down for that.
Okay. Fun times
Yeah.
for the narcissist.
Yeah. Right.
And, what is something to get us back on track? Like, how should we be viewing this video in a sense? Should we not be promoting it? What is the pros and cons to it?
I think the pros to the P. Diddy video are kind of the exposure of what he did full on. And the cons are that we should believe victims before we have to see that kind of evidence. Um, I don't know the data or statistics, but by and large, people are not lying about a bunch of different things that um, you hear a lot of rhetoric around, like rape and domestic abuse. There's not a lot of data that says people are just lying about this. That's first of all. It's similar to voter fraud. The statistics, we see this in certain um, parties where they'll say like, "Oh, there's voter fraud." The statistics on voter fraud are like 0.0000000. I'm not kidding. 0.001% of the time, somebody pretends to be someone and votes. So when you look at the data, people telling you that they're the victims of domestic abuse, narcissistic abuse, by and large, they are not fibbing. So we should start believing people based on the data, and that's really important. So I think there's a good and a bad to the video. I think it should have been launched more sensitively. because I think a lot of people are triggered, by that experience. It's really, really horrifying to go through something like that. And especially, we don't know if she wanted that. We don't know
Yeah.
what she wanted out. So we want to honor that experience. My sense is that she probably feels very validated, but I don't know her.
Well, I heard, and this is just rumors that I've heard. I heard that she didn't want the video out there, but that's just something that I heard, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And I don't know, but usually it's funny because usually survivors have a common theme of how they think usually, but then every survivor has a different situation and a different healing experience and different opinions about everything, but usually it's I personally, if there was a video out there about my attack with John, I would want control of that,
Yeah. It's a good point.
you know? And
It's a
I
good point.
thank you. I think this is like the perfect note to wrap up on, and that we'll be having on other guests soon. If you want to interview with me and Vanessa, come on our show. Come on the show. We would love to have you hear your experience about a toxic, narcissistic relationship, and maybe we'll find healing and solace together.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think that point that you made is really important. The control, so she could have had, because that's the trauma of it, isn't it? It's to have that lack of control,
Yeah.
so that feeling of empowerment of having control over your narrative, over your story is paramount. So I think that's a really important point that you just made.
Thank you. Thank you. And would you mind answering a few more questions for the Patreon?
Sure.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Tara's Baddies Club with Vanessa Reiser. If you want to share your story, please reach out to Tara Newell, pr@gmail.com, and I would love to see if you're a good fit for the show. So until next time, I'm Tara Newell. Please give 5 stars, a good rating, and subscribe on YouTube. Thank you, and believe survivors.